All right, everyone tuning in on our 3 News Now Facebook page. I'm Jennifer Griswold, and we are having a forum this morning where we are talking all about hidden bias or implicit bias. First of all, what is that? How do we address it? How do we deal with it? How do we address it when it comes to other people? And what areas in our lives might we see this a little more? I'm joined with a panel of experts. We have Michael Robinson, who's with the Business Ethics Alliance, Joe Garcia, who's with Fair Housing Center of Nebraska and Iowa, and Reverend Cynthia Lindenmeyer, who's with Sacred Activism. So we'll be addressing any questions and comments that viewers have. So please feel free to just leave it in the comments, and we'll be able to see that and address anything you'd like to bring up. And I introduced everyone there, but I would like to do kind of a go around of everyone, asking them, so when we say the words hidden bias, what do you think of? What does that mean? Michael Robinson, I will start with you. And if you want to give a little bit more of your background besides your title, go ahead.
I appreciate it. Michael Robinson, Executive Director, CEO with the Business Ethics Alliance. And when Jennifer, great question. And as it pertains, the hidden bias, we all have blind spots as individuals, and it starts at a young age, and they're a part of our DNA. But biases are primarily unintended attitudes and beliefs that we have pertaining to individuals and social groups. But it's aside from that, is how we conduct ourselves. And one thing that we try to provide at the Business Ethics Alliance is a space for leaders and organizations to have healthy conversations about topics such as this.
Yeah, and we appreciate that. We hoped just by talking about it is one of those things of raising awareness and attention to it, so maybe we can think about it a little more. Reverend Cynthia Lindenmeyer, can you tell us a little bit about what do you see as what is hidden bias?
Yeah, so I'm Cynthia Lindenmeyer, right now pastoring the Sacred Activism community, which is when you take the sacred, our spiritual journey, and you take your activism in a role. If you have one without the other, there's no power in that. But when you take the involvement of your meditation and your self-awareness, you combine that with transforming these social, political structures, and that force is what is called sacred activism. And that's my passion right now. My paying job, I'm actually an online chaplain for American Public University. And we are currently in the process of reviewing our curriculum with the Equity, Diversity, Inclusion program, so heavily involved in that. But I see hidden bias, implicit bias, whatever term you want to call it. It's really the story that we narrate of our life. And of course, in our own story, we're the lead actor, we're the star. Everything in our life, we want to fit to that screenplay. And we as people avoid change, we avoid anything that disrupts our comfortability. And so that's how I see hidden biases play a role into our life. If someone or the other doesn't fit into our screenplay, we navigate and judge or create a story which fits the one that we want to live. And so everything that Michael said, it's just that unconscious voice coming up and exploding sometimes at the wrong time, wrong place. And that reveals our hidden by the conscious, our own bias.
Yeah, it's so true. I mean, we have to make decisions on the spot quickly. And so the brain reacts to different things in our knowledge base. But, we, of course, then are turning to biases we may have and not even realize it. Joe Garcia, if you could give a little bit about your background, it's a little different. I think it's interesting. We were talking about fair housing and how bias plays a role in that and making sure people have housing and they aren't being discriminated against.
Right. Thank you and good morning, everyone. Like Jennifer said, my name is Joe Garcia and I'm the program director for the Fair Housing Center of Nebraska and Iowa, which is a program of the Family Housing Advisory Services. What we do here at the center is we tell people what the rights are when it comes to landlord-tenant issues, and we investigate discrimination in housing. So when I was asked to join this panel, this discussion group, I thought I knew what hidden bias was but quite frankly, I Googled it and I was off, because what we deal with here at the center is mostly overt discrimination, which is blatant, flat out, I know what I'm doing. But when I Googled what hidden bias was, and read the definition, what we do is deal with that as well. And like Michael and Cynthia mentioned, it's unconscionable words, actions that are done. And I can give examples of uh, uh, calls that I receive, because not only do we investigate discrimination in housing, but I do a lot of outreach and education to landlords, housing authorities, social workers about issues, and they tell me what the situation is. I tell them what their options are, and just listening to them and questions I'm asked. Yeah, we deal with hidden bias all the time.
I have to imagine that it has to be difficult when you are investigating and looking into these things. When it's overt, it may be easier to track and actually make a case for discrimination, but probably harder when you don't realize, you can't see it as clearly that someone may have these biases when dealing with people.
Right. It is. I mean, usually, like I said, and what we do is mostly overt. It's intentional. But a great example is I took a call from a landlord a couple days ago, asking about why she should rent to someone, a disabled person, with an emotional support animal. So I explained to her what the law is, and I tell them, I'm not here to tell you what to do. I'm not here to tell you how to run your business. I'll tell you what the law is. So she's telling me why she don't believe she should rent to this person with this emotional support animal. And then she stated, I just wish those people, because her fourplex or whatever it was had a no pet policy. She goes, I wish those people would only go to places where they allow pets. So I explained to her, well, let's take the disability part out of it. Let's take anyone with an emotional support animal and plug in the term Hispanic or African American. So what you're saying is, why shouldn't Hispanics or African Americans only go live where they're accepted? And it struck a chord with her. She goes, I guess you're right. I never thought of it that way. But I'm not a racist. Well, you may not be, but something to think about.
Sure, just wasn't allowing herself to see that perspective. Perhaps it looks like someone watching in responded with the sad face. Yeah, stuff like this, it's hard to hear about. It's hard to talk about, for sure. As we talk about this, so she said, I didn't know this. I didn't think of it that way. So for people out there, how do we recognize this in ourselves? How do we take a look in the mirror and say, I mean, I don't think I'm this way, so what do I need to know? How do I look at this? Michael, can you tackle that at all? And this is true for people living their daily lives. This is for people in their jobs. This is for parents dealing with other kids. I mean, all of the things. How do we see this in ourselves, and how do we take a look at it?
And I'll tie back to, Dr. Cynthia's point in regards to that, write our own screenplay. And we have to, take a step back and look at, our, ethical lens as an individual, and our, basically our bias lens, because it's internally, and anything internal basically impacts the external. And that, especially in the work environment, you establish a culture, and whether it's from the leadership or just the environment in general, that becomes, the way of the land. But when you're looking at, as far as recognizing our own biases, it's a self-reflection, self-awareness, taking the initiative to get education, and be more aware about, topics such as this. A lot of times there's trainings provided, but they're more so one-off, where it get me more of consistency in that aspect to, and also be around individuals, I guess, that have those experiences, because that's another way that we learn, by like-minded as far as experiences in life. So that's, one area that I'll, focus on, as far as that, having that internal reflection, bear roots as far as how you would, base it, how you would judge yourself as an individual, comparing to biases.
I was muted there. Good point
Oh,
to surround yourself with other people too, because part of the bias comes from only surrounding yourself with a like-minded way that becomes the way you think. But if you have more people around you thinking other ways, you might be able to see it in yourself a little bit. Um, Cynthia, how do you think we can address this and look in the mirror and deal with it within ourselves?
Yeah, I like what Michael was saying. It reminded me of, I think it's on Netflix. It's about the social dilemma, how we easily get caught into a bubble and we surround ourselves with people who, like I said, fit our story. And just look at the friends you have. Look at the 5, 10 people you're hanging out with. And if they all look like you, think like you, then you definitely got many biases that are just bubbling inside. But I'd say we all have biases. Everyone has them. And it's not good or bad. Just recognize that our evolution, be it cultural, social, educational, is going to form those type of ideas that we have. But I'd say the best way to deal with it and recognize it, and I'm going to go to the spiritual realm here, is mindfulness, being aware of what is going on in your mind and just practicing loving kindness. And it sounds so easy to be mindful and have loving kindness, but it's difficult. I struggle with it, and practicing meditation, quieting the mind, and then being self-aware when you're in a situation. And just I found myself doing it this morning. I was at uh, Walmart buying something, and now they have all those self-checkout places. And I didn't want to get behind one person because I thought they were going to be. Why did I think that? Because they were probably in their 80s. And so I had this bias that, oh, because this person is older, they're going to be slower at the checkout place. And I was like, gosh, that's a real bias thought I just had. And she was the quickest one out, quicker than the younger folks. So, I think it's just being aware of that narration that's going in your mind, and where is it leading to you, and so changing your perception so you can change your actions, and that will change your reality. You live being aware of your biases, but then it not transcend into an action.
Yeah, I think that's important too. As you said, she proved you wrong with your bias too. So be just as mindful of those too, of, oh, I didn't think it would happen that way. And maybe that's because I had that bias in place, and maybe I should change it to realize it doesn't always happen that way. And I need to pay attention and be open-minded and not so defensive too. Right? Yeah, open to what I'm thinking for sure. Um, Joe, if you could address, I know you were talking about that landlord, for example. We're talking about how to address bias in ourselves, but how might we address it if we see it in someone else? If we want to be better and take that on a little bit, how could we explain to someone what they're doing and the bias they may not even see?
Yeah, I mean, it's people don't see it, and there's a time and a place to point it out. I took a call years ago from somebody who reached out to me and wanted to expand their market of individuals to rent to, and they wanted to diversify their tenants, and they wanted to run some ideas past me. And then she followed up with, or the person followed up with, how do I reach out to those type of people? And my response is, well, the first thing is we don't use the term those people. I didn't mean nothing by it. Well, you may not have, but nonetheless, it's a lot of self-reflection. And I use this following example a lot when I talk to landlords and housing providers. Years ago, we used to have a fundraiser here called the Toast to Fair Housing, and our director of development at the time got me on a local TV station, not KMTV3, but another local station, to talk about the event and to promote it. And so I'd go to the station, and I introduced myself as Joe Garcia. And So, okay, we go to commercial and they bring me in front of the camera and they say, okay, Joe, this is going to be great. We're going to talk about the event, talk about what you do, and we're going to raise a lot of money. So I said, okay. So 3, 2, 1, bam, the camera comes on, and the person, the TV guy goes, hi, and we're back, and we're going to talk about an event. I'm here with Jose Garcia with the Fair Housing Center. So we started talking about it. And I introduced myself as Joe. And granted, my name, the word Joe is Jose in Spanish, but I didn't introduce myself that way. And I wasn't offended. By no means was I offended, because I've been called a lot worse by my wife. So by no way was I offended, but it was just an observation. Would this person have called me Jose or introduced me as Jose if my last name wasn't Garcia, or if I didn't have brown skin? So my point is, and it wasn't intentional. It wasn't malicious by no means. Like I said, I didn't take no offense. It was just an observation. And I point that out, that you people have got to be careful. Like Cynthia said, we all have our biases. We all have our likes. We all have our dislikes. It's just a matter of realizing them, a lot of self-reflection, forums like this to bring it out, to think, wow, maybe I should look at myself a little bit closer and be careful, because although it may not be intentional, some people's skin are thicker than others. I mean, how many times do I go around, hey, Jose, or hey, let's go having a fiesta, or whatever the case may be? Would they say that? Would that person say that to a non-Hispanic person? It's just being aware of what you're saying and what you're doing.
No, I think that's such a good example, because as you said, you didn't think the person meant anything by it, but it shows that that person made some connection in their head when they heard your name, whether they meant it intentionally or not. They made that connection and it came out their mouth that way. And that's a perfect example of what the hidden implicit bias is. They made some thought about you right then and right there, and what they then did with that information, who knows? But yeah, that's just something to think about, how we do things like that probably a lot. And I would say, it's tough, because whether or not you want to address that with someone or call them out on that is obviously up to everyone. They have the right themselves. But I think if you're ever receiving it, you should try to be as receptive as possible if someone does call it out, because you probably didn't know you were even doing it. With that, yeah, Michael, what would you say when it comes to addressing someone who might have this hidden bias? Do you bring it up to them? Do you not?
I guess it depends on the situation, and what I mean by situation is the environment that you're in. If it's a protocol to where, say, I'll use workplace for example, protocol that you have to follow, I'll recommend following those policies and procedures by the organization, because sometimes if you were to, and I guess it's personal, an individual, if you're on the other end of it, you would take it personal, and that reaction can be a chain reaction as far as areas that you are going to get involved in that you didn't want to explore, as an employee. But I would definitely follow the protocol for the organization from a business or workplace perspective, and address the issue.
Yeah, Cynthia, what do you think about that when it comes to if someone has any implicit bias? Is this something to address with them? Is it something to kind of think about yourself, or what's your advice to people out there?
I think everyone gets subjected to different biases, and I always think of the phrase hurt people. And a lot of times those that have biases, it's coming out of some deep fear or uncertainty, and it's their own hurt. And so if you're receiving some kind of prejudice from someone, just whatever they think of you, that's their business. Don't own that. Don't give it any power. Don't give it any momentum at all. And that's easy to say, like on an individual level, but when you're in we'll just say an institution that isn't awake and isn't aware, and it perpetuates these implicit biases or implicit racism, you've got to speak out. And while Joe was talking, I remembered I was in the Army and I was single. My maiden name, I'm Chicana, is Ramirez. And I never heard anyone badmouth Hispanics. But when I got married and all of a sudden my name on my uniform is Lindenmeyer, I heard a lot of derogatory names, especially the wetbacks and everything. And I used to get so mad and I would speak up. And I think it is important for anyone to speak up. I don't care what the situation is. You have got to speak up. If it means you lose your job, so what? Better to lose your job than your dignity. But this is the problem. People aren't speaking up. And for example, what's going on right now with Coach McDermott, I think it's a wonderful learning opportunity. And I think it revealed a hidden bias that he wasn't even aware of. And he's a great person. And we all have biases and we can't classify as good or bad. But I think this is a great opportunity for Creighton to look at itself and say, okay, what's going on here? And I'll just say at Creighton, I wonder, it's a religious institution, do they have images of Christ, a Black Christ, or a Middle Eastern Christ, or Hispanic Christ? And how would that change the reality of the bubble of Creighton if they had maybe more diverse pictures of religious aspects of different understandings of who Christ is? Because Christ isn't an old white dude. And I think that it's actions like that. And so take what's going on with Creighton and really use it for good, because I think a lot of great things can happen resulting from this great example of hidden bias.
And I can, after this discussion, I can go share in the comments a link if anyone's watching this and it wants to know a little more background, and then as well as comments from Creighton and from Coach Mack after this. You can read and see all of that there on this topic. But it does bring up that, yes, everything should be seen as a learning experience, whether it's for the individual people involved in it, but also for all of us. And I think that's why we're having these discussions, because we can learn and grow from things. And on that note, I mean, when we're talking about workplaces and things like that, Michael, you know, we've seen just a lot of hostility among people when it came to the election. And then before that, there was so much brought to light with social justice issues. And so moving forward, how would you say places and workplaces are making sure these conversations are had in a way that people are feeling more included?
For the most part, all of us, we want to be heard. And, regardless what the setting is, workplace or, in our, our social groups, we want our voice to be heard, and not only be heard, but to see those, actions, play out in those environments. So you're focusing on, the workplace, Jennifer, and talking about, as far as our voices being heard, we have to also realize that, our differences, we're from a different makeup, and having those different backgrounds and experiences basically reflect how we view, one another. And so tying back to that workplace environment is the fact that having the voice heard, but also putting it into action. So having those forums, whether it's a forum to where individuals can dialogue, healthy conversation amongst topics such as this. And that way we tend to, I guess, break down that, that those barriers when it comes to biases gradually. Not saying it's going to happen in one meeting, but that consistent conversation is very helpful to organizations in the long run.
Make it where it's top of mind for sure, where people can address those issues. Joe, when it comes to your sphere of housing and things, when people are feeling like they're discriminated against, or feeling like, whether it's outright or hidden, what is your advice to them? What resources are out there to make sure that they can get the help they need?
Yeah. Not everything is discrimination. We take calls. Well, my landlord was rude to me, and the way they talked down to me. Well, is it just to you? Does he talk to everybody like that? If he talks that way to everybody, then that's just a rude landlord, and they're not breaking the law. But if a person's being treated differently, if the terms of their residing there is based on their race, color, sex, religion, national origin, because they have children or disability, then that becomes a problem. We last year we've taken over 1,200 calls from individuals seeking assistance uh, uh, with their issues with their landlord. Of that 1,200, 365 were potential discriminatory cases that we investigated. Of that 365, and I'm gonna pick on the other two panelists. Of that, and I think Michael may know this, so I'm gonna go with Cynthia. Three of the 365, probably 80% of the cases we investigated were on one particular basis. Cynthia, what would you guess? Race, color, sex, religion, national origin, disability, or people with children? What would you guess?
I'm going to go with people who have passed evictions and people with children.
Okay. And this is always I always like to do that. Good guess, but it's on behalf of people with disabilities, and people are always shocked when I say that, and that's just not in Nebraska and Iowa. It's clear across the nation. So we do a lot of work on behalf of people with disabilities, and my unscientific theory on that is that being disabled knows no age limit, knows no race, knows no color, knows no religion. Any one of us can go out the door, get hit by a car, and become disabled. So my point is there's a bigger pool of people to choose from. So we do a lot of work on behalf of people with disabilities, and especially people with mental disabilities. I hear again, I'm not quite sure why. Maybe when a person with a physical disability, a person can see it. Where a person with a mental disability, there's not necessarily outward signs of that. So we do a lot of work on behalf of individuals with disabilities overall. But I guess I tend to veer off, Jennifer, I apologize. But as far as what should they do, give us a call. And it may be something, it may not be something, whether it's intentional or not. It's worth looking into for us to investigate.
And that actually is something we talked about on the phone, but I think is very important that we talk about hidden and implicit bias, and obviously this has come up in conversation quite a bit since protests this summer and more discussion this past summer. But hidden and implicit bias isn't necessarily or only race driven. You could have it for gender, you could have it for disabilities, all sorts of things. We talked about age before, so there are all different ways that this can manifest itself, and it's important to look at all of those different things. I wanted to close out by having all of you just give some final thoughts. It can be a bit of a recap of things we've already talked about, but what is your hope, I guess, moving forward when it comes to things like hidden and implicit bias? What is your hope that people understand and think about as we move forward? Michael, can I start with you?
I would just basically, end with Jennifer, is that we can't assume that we know, everything about a person, by what they think, what we hear, or what we see on the surface. It's we have to basically, dig deep and get to understand their ways, and basically have a chance to reflect and appreciate. Basically, if we don't agree, we have to, provide that look at the culture of, our workplace environment. But actually, the main purpose is basically getting to know the individual on their level, and set aside the assumptions. I know it's easier said than done, but it's those small steps. It takes move a mountain a stone at a time, and that's the process you have to take. When you're looking at hidden biases, that it's a gradual process.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Cynthia?
Yeah, I like the idea of getting to know another person's story. I mean, let go of your own screenplay and listen to someone else's story, know them. And someone who's helped me along my way. I've got many mentors I consider mentors here in Omaha, Ajmal Biden, Leo Lewis, Preston Love. And one thing Leo always says, he's like, do your homework. And you, as a white person, I have to research and educate myself, but not educate myself on the Eurocentric typical history, but learn a different narrative to shape the one that I grew up with, because many of us grew up with, sadly, teachers that were white, and even if you're Hispanic or Black and you had white teachers, there's many studies that show that that's going to show a bias against Black people, so, or a person of color. So it's our education structure that is deeply flawed as well. And so that's when the action comes in place. We need to relook at our school systems, at our curriculum, and do our own internal homework. And then, like I said, always go back to meditation and mindfulness so you can be very self-aware. And thank you both for being on the panel with me.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank all of you. Joe, final thoughts there, what you'd like people to take away.
You know, I think it starts with looking at yourself and see examples that I've given or that Cynthia or Michael have talked about, and see, gosh, I've done that before. Man, what else have I done? So I think it's just a lot of self-reflection, and then surround yourself with diversity. Get the training so that you can, like I said, it starts, if anything, it starts with each individual person. Look at yourself, see if that, I mean, I know I've been doing this for 20 years, and I know I've become more self-aware of the environment, of discrimination. So I think it starts with a lot of self-reflection.
Definitely. Thank you, all of you, for joining this conversation. We really appreciate it. We do want to let folks know who are watching that on Monday at 8 p.m. on KMTV, we will be having a special, it's an hour-long special called Hidden Bias, where we are addressing this topic more in depth. But we appreciate all of you for joining in on this conversation today.
Thanks for having us, Jennifer.
Thanks for having me.
Great being here.